My name is Brielle Morgan, and at 32, I found myself standing in a private jet terminal while my parents' most important client did a double take. 3 years earlier, they had disowned me at our family dinner, calling me a failed daughter for abandoning the family accounting firm. "She'll never amount to anything," my father had sneered. If only they could see me now, CEO of my own finance consulting company, with a net worth 10 times what they'd ever achieved. Their client's reaction was just the beginning of my sweet, calculated revenge. Hey there, before I dive into this wild journey of family betrayal and redemption, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family drama already has you hooked, hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories of sweet karma. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how I turned my parents' rejection into the fuel for my ultimate revenge. Let's get into it. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston, I was raised with a single purpose: to eventually take over Morgan and Associates, the accounting firm my grandfather had founded and my parents had expanded. The Morgan legacy was drilled into me from the moment I could understand basic math. My bedroom walls weren't adorned with posters of musicians or actors, but with framed accounting certificates and photos of my father shaking hands with prestigious clients. "Brielle, your future is set in stone," my mother Eleanor Morgan would remind me while helping me with calculus homework. She was a tall, elegant woman with perpetually perfect posture and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The Morgan name opens doors that others spend lifetimes knocking on. My father, Richard Morgan, was even more direct. "Being born a Morgan means you start life on the top floor while everyone else is fighting for the elevator," he'd say during our mandatory Sunday dinners, where conversation inevitably centered around the firm's weekly victories. I excelled academically, partly out of natural aptitude but mostly from the relentless pressure. National Honor Society valedictorian, then a full ride to Wharton for my undergraduate degree in finance. Every achievement was cataloged not as my personal success, but as another brick in the Morgan dynasty's foundation. During college, I began to notice the cracks in my parents' perfect facade. The way they treated service staff with barely concealed disdain. How they'd dissect other families' financial missteps at dinner parties with gleeful superiority. The calculated donations that seemed timed perfectly with tax advantages. Most disturbing was how they discussed their clients behind closed doors, not as partners to be served, but as resources to be exploited. "The Hendersons are getting divorced," my father announced one Christmas break, swirling expensive scotch in a crystal tumbler. "We'll need to restructure their accounts before she realizes half that money is hidden in offshore investments." My mother had simply nodded, making a note in her ever-present planner. "I'll call Patricia for lunch next week. Poor thing will need a shoulder to cry on. And someone to trust with her settlement." That was the first night I lay awake questioning if this was really the life I wanted. Still, momentum carried me forward. After Wharton came my MBA from Harvard, then the expected entry position at Morgan and Associates. My corner office was prepared before I even graduated. My name already on the door. My parking space assigned next to my parents. For 2 years, I played the part perfectly. I arrived early, left late, and built relationships with clients who were impressed by my fresh perspective combined with the Morgan reputation for excellence. Outwardly, I was the perfect Morgan successor. Inwardly, I was suffocating. The breaking point came when I discovered what my parents had done to the Lawrences, a family who had been with the firm since my grandfather's days. Mr. Lawrence had died unexpectedly, leaving his widow devastated and financially vulnerable. Rather than protecting her interests, my parents had manipulated her grief, steering her toward investment options that generated massive commissions for the firm, while depleting her principal at an alarming rate. When I confronted them, their response chilled me to the bone. "It's business, Brielle," my father said dismissively. "The firm comes first. Always." Margaret Lawrence would have made poor decisions anyway. "At least this way the money stays in competent hands." "Our hands," my mother clarified, not a hint of remorse in her voice. This is what we built for you. This is your inheritance. The sooner you understand how the world really works, the better. That night, I made my decision. I couldn't be part of this anymore. Couldn't perpetuate a legacy built on exploitation disguised as service. I spent weeks secretly developing my exit strategy, researching ethical finance practices, and identifying underserved market segments. I spoke with former classmates who shared my vision of financial services that genuinely helped clients build sustainable wealth. I withdrew my modest personal savings, enough for 6 months of living expenses if I was frugal. I secured a small office space in a converted warehouse downtown. Nothing like the gleaming Morgan and Associates tower, but mine in a way my corner office had never been. When everything was in place, I called a family meeting. We sat in the formal dining room of my parents' Beacon Hill home, the same room where countless business strategies had been discussed over perfectly cooked meals. "I'm leaving the firm," I said simply after declining a glass of wine. "I'm starting my own financial consulting practice focused on ethical wealth management and accessibility for clients who have been traditionally underserved." The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father laughed. A harsh, dismissive sound I'd heard directed at competitors but never at me. "Don't be ridiculous, Brielle. You have a responsibility to this family, to the legacy we've built." "I've made my decision," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "My resignation letter is on your desk. My office is already cleared out." My mother's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the mahogany table. "You'll fail," she said flatly. "You have no clients without the Morgan name, no connections that weren't given to you through us." "Then I'll build new ones," I countered. My father stood abruptly, his face flushing with anger. "If you walk out that door, you're no daughter of ours." "No, Morgan walks away from family." "Then I guess I'm not a Morgan anymore," I said, rising to meet his gaze. "A failed daughter," my mother pronounced, her voice ice cold. "That's what people will call you. The girl who threw away everything for some naive idealism. She'll never amount to anything." I walked out that night with nothing but my personal belongings and a determination to prove them wrong. Not just for my sake, but for all the Margaret Lawrences who deserved better than to be seen as cash cows for predatory firms like Morgan and Associates. Little did I know that 3 years later I would be standing in that private jet terminal face to face with the reality of how far I'd come, and how sweetly revenge could be served. The first 6 months of Integrity Financial Partners, my new venture, were brutal in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Despite my prestigious education and experience, doors that had once swung open at the mention of Morgan now remained firmly shut when I introduced myself as simply Brielle. My modest office in the converted warehouse became both workspace and occasional bedroom on nights when I worked too late to justify going home to my newly rented studio apartment. The furniture was secondhand, the technology outdated but functional, a far cry from the Italian leather and cutting-edge systems at Morgan & Associates. "You're making a mistake, miss," Morgan said. Walter Simmons, the first potential client I approached, a mid-level executive who had always been friendly during Morgan firm events. "Your parents have been handling my finances for 15 years. Why would I risk that relationship for your experiment?" His words stung, but they were hardly the harshest rejection. Some former family connections wouldn't even take my calls. Others agreed to meetings only to lecture me on family loyalty before declining my services. One particularly brutal lunch ended with Richard and Eleanor told everyone what happened. Nobody wants to do business with a daughter who betrays her parents. The financial strain became increasingly worrisome. My savings dwindled faster than projected, eaten away by unexpected business expenses and the brutal reality of starting from scratch in a field dominated by established names. I sold my designer wardrobe piece by piece, trading Louboutins for rent payments and Chanel for client acquisition software. My parents, meanwhile, launched what could only be described as a systematic campaign to ensure my failure. Rumors circulated among Boston's financial elite that I was unstable, unreliable, possibly even involved in questionable practices. Potential partners backed out of agreements at the last minute with vague apologies. A promising interview with a local business magazine was mysteriously canceled. "It's nothing personal," explained James Rothwell, a former family friend who at least had the decency to be honest about why he was canceling our contract. "But your father golfs with half my clients, and your mother is on 3 charity boards with my wife. I can't afford to be caught in the middle of this family war." The isolation was perhaps the most difficult adjustment. I had always been surrounded by people, classmates, colleagues, clients, the constant social whirl of Boston's elite business circles. Now, many Friday nights found me alone in my office, poring over business strategies and trying to identify potential clients outside my parents' sphere of influence. My one consistent source of support came from an unexpected place. Zoe Whitman, my college roommate from freshman year, had built a successful tech startup focused on financial literacy for underserved communities. When I reached out, more desperate than I cared to admit, she didn't hesitate. "I always thought you were wasting your talent at that dinosaur firm," she said over coffee in her vibrant office space, so different from the stuffy confines I'd grown up in. "The Morgans build wealth for the wealthy. But there's a whole world of people who need financial guidance and don't have access to it." Zoe introduced me to her network: young entrepreneurs, community organizers, nonprofit leaders, people who needed financial expertise but had been traditionally ignored by firms like my family's. They couldn't afford the high minimums Morgan and Associates required, but they were building businesses and communities that deserved support. "Think about it," Zoe challenged me. "What if instead of helping millionaires become multimillionaires, you help small business owners become financially stable? What if you created wealth where there wasn't any before, instead of just moving it around?" Her perspective shifted something fundamental in my approach. I redesigned my business model, creating tiered service packages that made financial consulting accessible at various income levels. I developed workshops for community centers and small business incubators, offering free basic financial literacy sessions that built trust and occasionally led to paying clients. Slowly, painfully slowly, I began to build a client base. A local bakery owner who needed help securing expansion financing. A group of teachers pooling resources to invest collectively. A neighborhood association looking to create a community development fund. None of these clients would have impressed my parents. The fees were modest compared to what Morgan and Associates commanded, but each success story spread through word of mouth, bringing more opportunities. 8 months in, working on minimal sleep and maximum stress, I landed my first significant break. Zoe recommended me to Xavier Washington, founder of a mid-sized tech company focusing on healthcare accessibility. He had recently received substantial venture capital funding and needed comprehensive financial strategy. Our initial meeting was tense. Xavier was direct about his concerns. "I know who your family is," he said, studying me carefully across the conference table in his modest but modern office. "The Morgans have a certain reputation." "How do I know you're any different?" I laid out my philosophy of transparent, ethical financial management. I explained why I'd left my family's firm and what I was building instead. Then I showed him something I'd never shared with anyone else: documentation of how Morgan and Associates had manipulated the Lawrences and other vulnerable clients disguised as standard financial practices. "This is why I left," I said quietly. "And this is why Integrity Financial Partners exists. I'm not just running from something, I'm building something better." Xavier was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "My mother lost her retirement savings to a predatory financial advisor after my father died. She was too ashamed to tell me until it was too late." He extended his hand. "You've got 3 months to prove your approach works, then we'll evaluate." That night I cried for the first time since leaving my parents' house, not from despair but from sheer relief. One chance was all I needed. Xavier's business thrived under my guidance, and he became not just a client but a vocal advocate. His recommendation led to contracts with other tech startups in his circle. By the end of my first year, I had hired 2 junior associates and moved into a proper office space. Nothing lavish, but professional and welcoming. The struggle wasn't over. My parents' influence still created obstacles, and building a business from scratch remained exhausting. But for the first time, I could see a path forward that wasn't just about surviving. It was about creating something meaningful and genuinely mine. 2 years after leaving Morgan and Associates, Integrity Financial Partners had grown beyond my initial vision. We occupied a full floor in a sustainable building downtown with a team of 15 dedicated professionals who shared my commitment to ethical finance. Our client list had expanded to include several mid-sized companies, a handful of tech startups with significant funding, and an innovative program providing financial education and services to first-generation college graduates. Building careers. I had just finished a particularly satisfying meeting with a women's business collective when my assistant Mia knocked on my door with an unusual expression. "There's someone here to see you," she said hesitantly. "He doesn't have an appointment, but it's Richard Coleman." The name hit me like a physical blow. Richard Coleman was not just anyone. He was the founder of Coleman Enterprises, one of my parents' oldest and most prestigious clients. The Coleman account was the crown jewel of Morgan and Associates, representing generations of wealth and influence. "Did he say what he wants?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. "Just that it's urgent and private," Mia replied. I smoothed my simple but elegant navy dress, no designer label but well-made and professional, and nodded. "Send him in." Richard Coleman entered my office with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. In his mid-60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, he carried the aura of old money and established power. I had met him several times at Morgan events, though I doubted he remembered me as anything more than Richard and Eleanor's obedient daughter. "Miss Morgan," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Mr. Coleman," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "This is unexpected. Please have a seat." He settled into the chair across from my desk, surveying my office with undisguised curiosity. The space was intentionally different from Morgan and Associates' intimidating opulence. Comfortable but not ostentatious, with plants and natural light creating a welcoming atmosphere. "I'll be direct," he said after a moment. "I'm considering moving my business from Morgan and Associates to your firm." For a moment, I was certain I'd misheard him. The Coleman account wasn't just valuable, it was a cornerstone of my parents' business, representing tens of millions in managed assets and a prestigious connection that attracted other wealthy clients. "That's unexpected," I managed. "May I ask why?" Coleman leaned back, studying me carefully. "I've been watching your firm's growth with interest. Your work with Xavier Washington's company was particularly impressive. Innovative financing solutions without the excessive fees typical of traditional firms. And your community investment initiatives align with changes my family foundation is implementing." He paused, his expression hardening slightly. "But there's more. Recently, I had my independent auditor review all my financial arrangements. What he found in the Morgan and Associates accounts was troubling. Investment vehicles designed to generate maximum management fees rather than optimal returns. Tax strategies that pushed ethical boundaries. Disclosures buried in fine print that no reasonable person would identify. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly what he was describing. Standard Morgan practices I had fought against before leaving. "When I confronted your father," Coleman continued, his response was dismissive. "He assured me everything was industry standard, and that I shouldn't concern myself with technical details. After 30 years, he still spoke to me as if I were financially naive." I remained silent, allowing him to continue. "Then, last week, I attended a financial literacy workshop your firm conducted for high school students. My granddaughter's class participated. His expression softened. The clarity with which your team explained complex concepts, the emphasis on ethical decision-making, it was refreshing, and it made me question why I was accepting less from my own financial advisors. The workshop he mentioned had been one of our pro bono community initiatives, something my parents would have considered a waste of valuable time. I never imagined it would reach someone in Coleman's position. I appreciate your candor, Mr. Coleman, I said carefully. But I should be transparent. Taking your business would significantly escalate tensions with my parents. They would see it as a direct attack. Coleman nodded. I'm aware of the situation between you and your parents. Boston's financial community is smaller than it appears. His gaze was steady. The question is whether you're prepared for what might follow if we proceed. The implications were clear. This wasn't just about gaining a prestigious client. It was potentially the first domino that could threaten my parents' carefully constructed empire. The thought was both terrifying and, I had to admit, somewhat satisfying. If you're serious about exploring this transition, I'd want to ensure it's for the right reasons, I said. I don't want to be a weapon in any grievance you might have with Morgan and Associates. My firm exists to provide ethical financial services, not to settle scores. Coleman smiled for the first time. That response confirms I'm making the right decision. I'm not here out of spite, Miss Morgan. I'm here because at my age, legacy matters. I want my family's wealth managed with integrity for the generations to come. Your firm's name isn't accidental, is it? Over the next 2 hours, we discussed what transitioning his accounts would entail. The complexity was daunting. Untangling decades of financial structures would take months of careful work. But the potential was undeniable, not just financially, but as a statement about what Integrity Partners represented. As Coleman prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Your parents will fight this, you know. They won't let go of our account without using every connection and tactic at their disposal. I nodded, a mixture of determination and anxiety settling in my chest. I know. Good, he said. Because I'm not just bringing my personal and business accounts. I've discussed your firm with several members of my extended family and 2 business partners who have also expressed dissatisfaction with Morgan and Associates. If things proceed well with my transition, they're prepared to follow. After he left, I sat alone in my office as evening shadows lengthened, understanding that I stood at a crucial crossroads. Accepting Coleman as a client would transform Integrity Partners overnight and make me a direct competitor to my parents in a way I had carefully avoided until now. The potential rewards were enormous, but so were the risks. My parents had decades of connections and wouldn't hesitate to use them against me. The coming storm would test everything I'd built. I picked up my phone and called Xavier Washington, the client who had given me my first real chance. I need some advice, I said when he answered, about taking a step that can't be undone. Wow, we've hit a major turning point in my story. Richard Coleman's visit changes everything for both my business and my relationship with my parents. Things are about to get intense, and I can't wait to share what happens next. But first, let me know in the comments if you've ever had to make a decision that you knew would change everything in your life. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe or taking a huge risk for something you believe in? While you're thinking about that, don't forget to hit that like button if you're enjoying this family drama, and subscribe if you want to see more stories about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Now let's continue and see how my parents react when they find out about Coleman's decision. The Coleman transition was underway when the inevitable confrontation with my parents occurred. We had managed to keep the process quiet for nearly 3 weeks. A minor miracle in Boston's gossip-prone financial circles. I had assembled a specialized team within Integrity Partners dedicated solely to ensuring the complex transfer proceeded smoothly with heightened confidentiality protocols in place. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when millions of dollars are in motion. I was working late reviewing the Coleman Family Foundation structure with my senior financial advisor when my office phone rang. Mia had left hours ago, so the call transferred directly to my line. Brielle Morgan, I answered, distracted by the documents spread across my desk. You think you're clever, don't you? My father's voice, cold with fury, sent a chill through me despite the warmth of my office. Sneaking around behind our backs, stealing clients you have no right to approach. I took a deep breath, signaling my colleague to give me privacy. Good evening to you too, father. I assume you've heard about Richard Coleman's decision. Decision, he spat the word. You mean your manipulation? What did you tell him? What lies did you spread about our firm to seduce him away? The accusation was so backwards, it would have been laughable if it weren't so typical of my father's worldview. In his mind, clients were possessions to be guarded, not individuals with agency and judgment. Mr. Coleman approached me, I replied evenly. He made his decision based on his own evaluation of both firms. That's how business works in the real world. Clients choose their advisors. After 30 years with Morgan & Associates, my father's voice rose. People like Coleman don't change financial managers like they change shirts. You must have offered him something, promised something you can't deliver. I offered transparency, ethical management, fee structures that prioritize his interests over ours. I paused. And yes, that apparently was something he couldn't get at Morgan & Associates. The silence that followed was more threatening than any shouting. When my father spoke again, his voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. You have 24 hours to contact Coleman and end this charade. Tell him there was a misunderstanding. Direct him back to us with appropriate apologies, and perhaps, we can minimize the damage to your reputation. That's not going to happen, I said firmly. Coleman is a client of Integrity Partners now. His choice, his right. Then prepare for war, my father said simply. By the time I'm done, you won't have a business left. No one crosses Richard Morgan without consequences. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat motionless for several minutes, my father's threat echoing in my head. It wasn't empty. He had the connections, resources, and utter lack of scruples to make good on his promise. The question was how far he would go and whether Integrity Partners was strong enough to withstand whatever was coming. The next morning began the onslaught. 3 clients called to cancel their contracts, each with vague explanations about reconsidering their financial strategy. Our appointment calendar suddenly developed mysterious gaps where confirmed consultations had been. Our application for an expanded line of credit, essential for the office renovations needed to accommodate our growing team, was denied despite our excellent financial standing. By noon, I understood the scope of my father's attack. He wasn't just targeting our business relationships, but our entire operational infrastructure. I called an emergency meeting with my leadership team, laying out the situation without varnish. Morgan & Associates is coming after us with everything they have, I explained to the concerned faces around our conference table. They're calling in favors, pressuring mutual contacts, and will likely start planting doubts about our stability and competence next. I need to know if you're prepared for what this means. Xavier Washington, who had joined our advisory board 6 months earlier, spoke first. Are you asking if we're afraid of a fight, Brielle? Because if I recall correctly, everyone in this room joined Integrity specifically because we weren't satisfied with business as usual. Your parents represent everything we're trying to change. Murmurs of agreement circulated the table, but I raised a hand for caution. This won't be a fair fight, I warned. My father doesn't recognize ethical boundaries when he feels threatened. Your reputations, your careers could be affected by association with me during this conflict. My chief financial officer, a woman who had left a prestigious position at a major bank to join our financial revolution, as she called it, straightened her shoulders. Then we document everything she said decisively. Every canceled contract, every suspicious coincidence. If they're using underhanded tactics, we create a paper trail. 2 can play the information game. The meeting transitioned from crisis management to strategic planning. While my parents might control traditional financial networks, we had our own strengths. connections in emerging industries, strong relationships with younger entrepreneurs, and perhaps most importantly, a reputation for integrity that gave us credibility my parents couldn't match. We accelerate the community initiatives, suggested our community outreach director. Double the financial literacy workshops, launch the scholarship program early. Make it clear to the public whose side we're really on. As strategies took shape, my assistant entered with a concerned expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see." She handed me her tablet open to the business section of the Boston Globe's website. The headline made my blood run cold. "Financial Dynasty in Crisis, Morgan and Associates Faces Client Exodus and Ethics Questions." The article detailed not just Coleman's departure, but included quotes from 2 other former Morgan clients, citing concerns about investment practices and questionable fee structures. Most shocking was a statement from a former Morgan and Associates employee alleging systematic misrepresentation of investment risks to elderly clients. I hadn't leaked any of this. This wasn't my doing. "It seems," Xavier said quietly, reading over my shoulder, "that your father's tactics have made other enemies over the years. Once the first domino falls." The implications were staggering. My confrontation with my parents had inadvertently created an opening for others who had grievances against Morgan and Associates, but had previously been afraid to speak out. As the meeting concluded, my phone lit up with a text message from an unknown number. "The Beacon Street office, 7 p.m. Come alone. E.M." My mother, requesting a private meeting away from Morgan and Associates headquarters. Something had shifted in the family power dynamic, and for the first time since this began, I felt a flicker of hope that reconciliation might be possible, on new terms. What I couldn't know was that the meeting would reveal family secrets far more devastating than financial improprieties, secrets that would permanently alter my understanding of the Morgan legacy. The Beacon Street property was one of my mother's personal real estate investments, a stately brownstone in one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods, maintained as a pied-à-terre for visiting associates and the Fawford and Five de Say. Occasional family retreat when my parents wanted privacy. I hadn't been there since leaving Morgan and Associates. As my rideshare pulled up at precisely 7 p.m., memories flooded back. Weekend strategy sessions in the wood-paneled study, rehearsing presentations while my mother critiqued my delivery, learning to perfect the Morgan mask of confident competence that had become second nature before I finally broke free. I keyed in the security code, surprised it hadn't been changed, and entered the foyer. The house was dimly lit, with only the soft glow of the library visible down the hallway. I followed the light, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors. My mother sat alone, perched on the edge of an antique leather chair, a glass of untouched scotch on the table beside her. She looked smaller, somehow less intimidating than the woman whose disapproval had shaped so much of my life. For the first time, I noticed the fine lines around her eyes, the slight tremble in her perfectly manicured hands. "You came," she said simply, "neither warm nor cold." A statement of fact. "You asked," I replied, remaining standing. "Though I have to admit I'm curious why the secrecy. Where's Father Richard? Doesn't know I'm here?" Something in her tone made me take a closer look at her face. The perfect Eleanor Morgan composure was fractured. Subtle signs most people would miss, but that I could read after a lifetime of studying her moods for signs of approval or displeasure. "What's happening, Mother?" I asked, softening my approach slightly. She gestured to a chair across from her. "Sit down, Brielle. What I have to tell you requires context." I complied, watchful but increasingly curious. "The Coleman account," she began, then stopped, recalibrating. "No, this goes back further. I need to tell you about your grandfather. This was unexpected. William Morgan, my father's father and founder of Morgan and Associates, had died when I was 14. I had memories of a stern, distant man whose rare moments of approval were cherished family currency. Your grandfather built Morgan and Associates from nothing," my mother continued, reciting family lore I'd heard countless times. Or, that's the story we all tell. The self-made man narrative so essential to the Morgan mystique. She took a small sip of her scotch, grimacing slightly. It's a lie. All of it. William Morgan didn't build anything from nothing. He stole it. I remained silent, sensing we were approaching something significant. In 1963, William was a junior accountant at Coleman Financial Advisors, she said quietly. Yes, that Coleman. Richard Coleman's father, James Coleman, founded the company and mentored your grandfather. This contradicted everything I'd been told about our family history. The Morgans and Colemans had always been presented as separate dynasties, competitors who respected each other from opposite sides of Boston's financial battlefield. James Coleman was innovative, brilliant, and by all accounts deeply ethical, my mother continued. He was developing new approaches to wealth management that would have revolutionized the industry. Your grandfather was his protege, the son he never had. Until Richard was born when James was nearly 50. She rose abruptly, moving to a small secretary desk in the corner. From a hidden compartment, she withdrew a weathered leather portfolio. With James distracted by his new family, William saw an opportunity. He copied James's proprietary investment strategies, client lists, everything. Then established Morgan Financial in a different part of the city, systematically targeting Coleman clients, with promises of better returns using the very methods James had developed. She handed me the portfolio. Inside were documents yellowed with age, original business plans, client correspondence, newspaper clippings about a promising new financial firm led by William Morgan. By the time James realized what had happened, William had secured enough clients and capital to establish himself as a competitor. James considered legal action, but financial services were less regulated then. And William had been careful to change just enough details to make proving outright theft difficult. I leafed through the documents, increasingly disturbed. How do you know all this? A bitter smile touched my mother's lips. Because your father told me when we got engaged. Presented it as a testament to Morgan business acumen. How his father had outsmarted old man Coleman. It was framed as a point of pride. She shook her head. I was young, ambitious, and impressed by the Morgan success. I convinced myself it was just aggressive business tactics. But the Colemans know, I said slowly, pieces falling into place. That's why Richard Coleman came to me. This isn't just about current business practices. My mother nodded. The Coleman family has waited 3 generations for this moment. A chance to reclaim what was stolen without destroying themselves in a public scandal that would damage client confidence. When you established Integrity Partners, with its emphasis on ethical practice, you unwittingly created the perfect vehicle for their revenge. The weight of this revelation settled over me. My entire professional identity had been built first in alignment with, then in opposition to the Morgan legacy. But that legacy itself was built on theft and deception. Does father know you're telling me this? I asked quietly. Your father is in denial, she replied. The Globe article has shaken him. 3 more major clients have indicated they're reviewing their relationship with the firm. He's convinced it's all your doing, that you've orchestrated a campaign to destroy what he built. She hesitated. But I've seen the evidence. The complaints were filed independently, and they reference issues from before you even left the firm. She leaned forward, suddenly intense. The Morgan Empire is vulnerable, Brielle. More vulnerable than it's been in 60 years. Your father is calling in every favor, threatening anyone who abandons ship, but it's only accelerating the exodus. People can sense weakness. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Because I want to propose an alternative to mutual destruction, she said simply. A merger. Integrity Partners and what remains of Morgan and Associates under your leadership. With a new name that honors neither family, but looks to the future. I stared at her shocked. You want me to save the firm after everything I want to salvage what can be salvaged, she corrected. And yes, perhaps make amends for my part in perpetuating William's original sin. For the first time, real emotion cracked through her perfect facade. I'm tired, Brielle, tired of the lies, the constant vigilance required to maintain the Morgan myth. Your grandfather was a thief. Your father became what he thought he needed to be, to protect that stolen legacy. And I chose to look away. The revelation shifted something fundamental in my understanding of my family. My righteous anger at my parents suddenly seemed simplistic in the face of this generational tragedy. They weren't just villains in my personal story, but products of a corrupt foundation I had never fully understood. I need time to think, I said, finally, rising from my chair. This isn't a decision I can make tonight. My mother nodded, looking relieved just to have unburdened herself of the secret. Take the documents, verify what I've told you, then decide what kind of legacy you want to build from these ashes. As I left the brownstone, the portfolio tucked under my arm, I realized I was carrying not just the evidence of my grandfather's betrayal, but the weight of 3 generations of moral compromise. Whatever I decided would define not just my future, but how the past itself would be remembered. I spent the next 3 days in a state of focused intensity, sleeping little and working constantly to verify my mother's revelations, while simultaneously developing a comprehensive strategy. The documents she had provided were just the beginning. Once I knew what to look for, other evidence emerged from public records, financial archives, and discreet conversations with industry veterans who remembered the early days of both firms. The truth was even more damning than my mother had suggested. William Morgan hadn't just stolen James Coleman's business methods. He had systematically undermined his mentor, spreading rumors about financial instability, intercepting clients, and eventually orchestrating a liquidity crisis that forced Coleman to sell valuable assets at a fraction of their worth. The original sin at the foundation of Morgan & Associates was worse than theft. It was betrayal of the most personal kind. Equally pressing was the accelerating crisis at my parents' firm. The Boston Globe article had opened floodgates. 2 former employees had filed formal complaints with regulatory authorities alleging practices that ranged from unethical to potentially illegal. 4 more major clients had announced their intention to move their accounts. The Morgan & Associates stock price had dropped 15% in 2 days. My father predictably had doubled down, denying all allegations, threatening legal action against defamatory claims, and intensifying pressure tactics against both former clients and my own firm. But the desperate quality of these moves only reinforced the impression of a dynasty in decline. On the morning of the 4th day, I called an expanded leadership meeting at Integrity Partners, including not just my executive team, but our legal counsel, communications director, and several key advisors from outside the firm. What I'm about to share stays in this room. I began after ensuring the conference room was secure. I methodically presented my mother's revelations, the additional evidence I'd uncovered, and the full scope of Morgan & Associates' current vulnerability. The reactions ranged from shock to vindication, but it was Xavier who cut to the heart of the matter. You have a nuclear option, he observed. You could completely destroy Morgan & Associates with this information. The question is whether that serves your long-term objectives. Our legal counsel, a former SEC attorney who had joined Integrity Partners specifically because of our ethical stance, leaned forward. From a purely legal perspective, most of William Morgan's actions fall outside statutes of limitation. The recent allegations against current practices are more legally actionable, but would require a lengthy public and potentially damaging process for all involved. She adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. However, the court of public opinion operates under different rules. This story, the mentor betrayed the dynasty built on deception, the poetic justice of the founder's granddaughter establishing an ethical alternative. It's powerful. Too powerful to waste on simple destruction, added our communications director. If our goal is just to burn Morgan & Associates to the ground, we're missing an opportunity to transform the narrative around financial services more broadly. I nodded, having reached similar conclusions during my sleepless nights. My mother has proposed a merger. Morgan and Associates absorbed into Integrity Partners under my leadership with a new name. This generated immediate discussion with valid concerns raised about integrating a firm with such different values and the potential damage to our reputation by association. I have a counter-proposal, I said when the initial debate had run its course. Not a merger, but a controlled transition. We don't want Morgan and Associates' client book at any cost. We want to rescue those clients who have been poorly served while maintaining our ethical standards. Over the next hours, we developed a multifaceted strategy. First, I would meet privately with Richard Coleman, sharing the full history I had uncovered and acknowledging the debt my family owed his. Rather than positioning Integrity Partners as the instrument of his revenge, I would propose a partnership focused on establishing new industry standards for transparency and client service. Second, we would approach selected Morgan and Associates clients, focusing on those who had experienced the most problematic practices, with a specialized transition program that included comprehensive financial review and remediation of any disadvantageous positions they had been placed in. Third, we would create a pathway for Morgan and Associates employees who wanted to escape the toxic culture but feared career repercussions. This would include confidentiality, guarantees, and professional development to align with Integrity Partners' ethical framework. Finally, and most controversially, I would offer my father a choice: facilitate an orderly transition that would preserve client interests and allow him a dignified exit, or face the public disclosure of the complete Morgan history from William's original betrayal through to current regulatory issues. It's not blackmail, our legal counsel clarified. You're offering a legitimate business alternative to mutually assured destruction. The choice remains his. As the meeting concluded, Xavier pulled me aside. This plan walks a moral tightrope, he said quietly. Using the threat of disclosure to force compliance even for good ends. Are you comfortable with that approach? It was the question I had been asking myself through sleepless nights. I'm not comfortable with any of this, I admitted. But allowing Morgan and Associates to continue harming clients while my father scorches the earth trying to destroy Integrity Partners, that's not acceptable either. Sometimes all available choices involve compromise. Xavier studied me for a moment, then nodded. As long as you recognize the compromise, power, even used for good purposes, changes the one who wields it. His warning stayed with me as I prepared for the most difficult meeting of all. Confronting my father with the truth about our family legacy and the choice that would determine its future. I arranged for neutral ground, a private dining room at the Bristol, a restaurant known for its discretion. No Morgan and Associates territory, no Integrity Partners home field advantage. Just two people with a shared history and divergent values deciding the fate of hundreds of clients and employees. The reservation was made for the following evening. I spent the intervening hours rehearsing different approaches, anticipating my father's reactions and strengthening my resolve. This wasn't just about business strategy or even personal vindication anymore. It was about breaking a cycle of exploitation that had persisted for 3 generations. As I left my office that evening, my assistant handed me an unexpected envelope that had been delivered by courier. Inside was a brief note in my mother's elegant handwriting. Whatever you decide, remember that legacies can be remade. The sins of the father need not be visited upon the daughter. Attached was a flash drive containing financial records I had been unable to access. Internal documents that completed the picture of both William Morgan's original deception and the current state of Morgan and them. Associates' more questionable practices. My mother had chosen a side, and surprisingly, it wasn't my father's. Armed with this final piece of evidence, I was ready to confront Richard Morgan not just as his daughter or competitor, but as someone with the power to either save or destroy everything he had spent his life protecting. My father arrived at the Bristol exactly on time. Punctuality had always been a Morgan virtue. His face was drawn. the confident mask, slipping to reveal the strain of recent weeks. When he saw me waiting in the private dining room, something flickered in his eyes. Resignation, perhaps, or the reluctant acknowledgement that I had become a force he could no longer dismiss. "Brielle," he said, simply taking the seat across from me. "Father," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Thank you for coming. Your mother said it was important." His tone was guarded. "Though I confess, I'm surprised you wanted to meet after everything." I placed the leather portfolio on the table between us. "We need to talk about grandfather, about James Coleman, about how Morgan and Associates really began." The color drained from his face as he recognized the documents. "Where did you get these? That's not important," I said. "What matters is what we do next." Over the next 2 hours, I presented him with the complete picture I had assembled. William Morgan's betrayal, the systematic exploitation of clients over decades, and the rapidly unraveling present situation. I laid out my proposal, not a hostile takeover, but a structured transition that would preserve client interests while allowing him to exit with dignity. Throughout my presentation, he remained largely silent, his initial shock giving way to a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. When I finally finished, he looked older than I had ever seen him. "You've thought of everything," he said finally. "The perfect strategic response. A true Morgan, after all." "No," I corrected him gently. "That's the point. I'm offering a different path. One that breaks the cycle grandfather started. This isn't about winning at all costs. It's about making things right." He studied me for a long moment. "And if I refuse, if I fight this to the end, then I'll release everything I said simply. Not out of vengeance, but because the clients deserve to know the truth. They deserve the chance to make informed choices about who manages their financial futures." Another long silence followed. Then, to my astonishment, he laughed. A short, rueful sound entirely unlike his usual calculated mirth. "Your grandfather would have respected you, you know. Not liked you. William never appreciated being outmaneuvered, but respected you." He shook his head slowly. "I spent my life trying to protect his legacy. Never questioned whether it deserved protection." "It's not too late to create a better one," I offered quietly. In the end, he agreed to my terms. Not with grace or enthusiasm, but with the pragmatism that had always characterized his business decisions. The transition would take months to complete, but the foundation was laid that night in a private dining room between a father who had spent his life perpetuating a lie and a daughter determined to build something authentic in its place. 6 months later, I stood at the podium during the formal announcement of the newly established Morgan-Coleman Alliance, a partnership between Integrity Partners and the restructured remains of both founding families' firms. Beside me stood Richard Coleman and, somewhat surprisingly, my mother, who had emerged as an unexpected ally in creating a transparent transition plan. My father had retired officially, though he served in an advisory capacity during the transition. Our relationship remained complex and sometimes strained, but there was a fragile new honesty between us that held the potential for eventual healing. As I concluded my remarks to the assembled financial press and industry representatives, I emphasized that the new organization would be judged not by its founding narrative, but by its ongoing commitment to ethical practice and client service. "Legacy isn't what we inherit," I said, making eye contact with my mother briefly. "It's what we choose to build with what we're given. Today we choose integrity as our foundation." Later that evening, as I prepared to board a private flight to meet with West Coast clients, the same terminal where my parents' client had spotted me 3 years earlier, I reflected on the journey from failed daughter to industry reformer. The Morgans had been right about one thing: their name had opened doors. But it was what I chose to do after walking through those doors, the values I championed, the standards I upheld, that had ultimately defined my path. The pilot approached, informing me the jet was ready for boarding. As I gathered my belongings, I noticed a text message from Xavier. "Congratulations on rewriting the ending to your family story. Some failures turn out to be the most successful rebellions. I smiled, pocketing my phone and stepping toward the future I had chosen. One built not on deception, but on the radical notion that financial success and ethical practice could not just coexist, but thrive together. Wow. What an incredible journey we've been through together. This story of betrayal, redemption, and finding one's own path really resonates with me, and I hope it touched you too. Have you ever discovered that something in your family wasn't what it seemed, or had to stand up for what's right, even when it was difficult? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of family drama and sweet justice made you think or feel something, please hit that like button to let me know. And if you want more stories about standing up for what's right and creating your own legacy, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Your support means everything to me. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this family revenge story. Remember, sometimes our greatest failures in others' eyes can become our most meaningful successes. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that message today, and I'll see you in the next story.